There are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, but there are also unknown knowns. The ancient and esoteric order of the Jackalope is devoted to unearthing and sharing this knowledge in podcast form. Each episode we take some piece of miscellaneous esoterica that has slipped through the cracks of common knowledge and share it to you in an easily digestible format. No topic is off limits, except for the obvious. Hey there, Lodge members. Number 13 here. We've got a nice change of pace for you this week. A story about a place where the beautiful people gathered and the party never stopped. In honor of that, I'm foregoing the water that I usually have during recording sessions for a cocktail. Of course, here at the end of quarantine, the liquor cabinet at the lodge is looking mighty empty, but I think I've managed to mix up something drinkable out of some ersatz Midori and something called Eau de Pickle. We'll find out. Smooth! The Garden of Oblivion, presented by number 13. In the beginning, it was just an open field. Maybe that's not the best place to start. After all, on a long enough timescale, everything was just an open field at some point. So let's be more specific. In 1905, it was just an open field adjacent to some citrus groves. Well, some citrus groves in the newly incorporated city of Hollywood, California. Even before the rise of the motion picture industry, Hollywood was hot property, and it didn't take a genius to realize that nearby areas were going to be hot property too. In 1905, real estate developer William H.A. snatched up some 160 acres of prime land just west of the city and started building along an unpaved road with the aspirational and grandiose name Sunset Boulevard. Hay set aside a few acres on the edge of the development for his own use. In 1913, he started construction on Havenhurst, a 12-room Spanish-style mansion with a 2-car garage and a verdant garden full of tropical plants and fruit trees. The mansion was completed in 1918, but Hay didn't live there for long because Havenhurst had attracted the attention of one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Though Alla Nazimova is largely forgotten today, at the time she was a huge get for Hollywood. She was a capital A actress who'd studied the Stanislavski system under the master himself as part of the Moscow Art Theater and cut her teeth on Chekhov and Ibsen. For decades, her Hedda Gabler was the standard against which all others were measured. Nazimova made her first film in 1916, the now-lost MGM drama War Brides, and Hollywood went nuts for her. Not only could she act circles around everyone else in town, but she had the look. Slender, pale, with dark hair and eyes that popped on cheap black and white film. Soon, she was earning $14,000 a week, making her one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood, second only to America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford. Well, one of Hollywood's biggest stars had to have one of Hollywood's biggest mansions. The one that caught Nazimova's eye was at the edge of the city on 8152 Sunset Boulevard, Havenhurst. Nazimova took out a 99-year lease on the mansion for an astounding $65,000 and then dropped another $30,000 for remodeling and landscaping. She left the gardens largely intact, but built an aviary and a rose garden. Most of the money went towards the construction of the biggest swimming pool in Hollywood, which was purportedly shaped like the Black Sea, though honestly it just looks like a regular kidney-shaped pool to me and almost everyone else. She called her new mansion Hotorok, or Little Farm in Russian. More properly, it was Hotorok West, since Nazimova had already used the name for her country estate in Rye, New York. Her friends had another name for it, the Garden of Allah, after the popular 1905 novel by Robert Hitchens, which had recently been adapted to the big screen, with Helen Ware in the lead role. The vivacious Nazimova was soon Hollywood's most popular hostess, holding regular parties at her mansion for Hollywood's smart set, Russian expatriates, and other capital A artists. Also for Hollywood's gay, lesbian, and bisexual community, which she was a proud member of. Some of the most frequent visitors to her informal 80/80 club included Mae Murray, Lillian Tashman, Norma Talmadge, and Rudolph Valentino. Alas, those salad days didn't last long. Nazimova hated the Hollywood studio system, which was designed to turn out mindless pap instead of art, and she also hated the studio moguls that were cheating her out of a fair share of the profits. Eventually, she struck out on her own and formed her own production house. In 1923, she spent a small fortune filming Oscar Wilde's Salome, lavishly recreating the Aubrey Beardsley illustrations from the 1904 edition. The film was breathtakingly gorgeous, utterly arresting, and also a total flop. The resulting shock to Nazimova's finances just about ruined her. It also came at the worst possible time. Movie roles were drying up since she was too old to be a Hollywood starlet and too proud to be a Hollywood matron. Her taxes were a mess, and she was also in the process of getting simultaneous divorces from her common-law American husband/beard Charles Bryant and a real Russian husband, Seryoja Golovin. So in 1925, Nazimova made two big moves. First, she returned to the stage, which was glad to have her back. And second, she hired Gene and John Adams to be her business managers and put her finances back on track. The Adamses had one piece of advice for NAZIMOVA. Turn your estate into a hotel, and we'll give you security for the rest of your life. NAZIMOVA remortgaged the Garden of Allah property and spent a small fortune refurbishing the interior rooms and building 25 Spanish-style villas around the pool. Day-to-day operation of the hotel was turned over to the Adamses, who took over NAZIMOVA's 99-year lease in exchange for a guaranteed $14,500 and 50% of all future profits. The Garden of Allah Hotel had its grand opening on January 8, 1927. There was an all-night debauch whose guest list included It Girl Clara Bow, former world heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey, studio moguls Sam Goldwyn and H.B. Warner, actors Betty Blythe, Francis X. Bushman, Rod LaRocque, Gilbert Roland, Lillian Tashman, and Conrad Veidt, and a host of others including child radio star Robert L. Greene, screenwriter Frances Marion, cowboy Fred Thompson, poet Iris Tree, and Ziegfeld girl Julia Ross. The first official guest was Madeline Herlock of Senate's Bathing Beauties. By the end of the year, though, it was clear that something was not right. The Adamses hadn't been making payments NAZIMOVA was counting on. In fact, they kept wiring her for more money for capital improvements, money which the cash-strapped NAZIMOVA just didn't have. When she pled poverty, the Adamses just vanished, never to be seen again. It turns out they were not reputable business managers, but con artists who had run a series of real estate scams all over the country. An investigation of the hotel's books revealed that the rents charged on the villas were not nearly enough to pay for the property's various mortgages and upkeep, let alone make a profit. And that's assuming the hotel was operating at full capacity, which it wasn't. After some legal wrangling, NAZIMOVA was eventually able to regain control of the hotel from the Adamses. She didn't have the funds to hold on to it, though, and wound up selling it back to William Hay, who she'd leased it from in the first place. After paying off her legal fees and debts, NAZIMOVA made a mere $7,500 from the sale. She spent a good chunk of those funds hiring private detectives to track down the Adamses, to no avail. Hay ultimately wound up reselling the property to new owners who continued to operate it as a hotel. The new managers made one small change. They changed the name from the Garden of Allah to the Garden of Allah with an H to distance the hotel from its former owner. That's when the fun times really started. As a hotel, the appeal of the Garden of Allah was simple. It was cheaper than a luxury hotel and nicer than a cheap hotel. It had a very well-stocked bar where the liquor never stopped flowing. And it was in Hollywood. Technically. The Garden actually straddled the city limits of Los Angeles, with part of the property in the city and the other part on unincorporated county land. NAZIMOVA had previously used this fact to her advantage, moving her furniture around to confound city and county tax assessors when they came a-callin'. For hotel guests, it was more of an inconvenience, because you had to figure out whose jurisdiction you were in when you needed to call the cops. And you would probably have to call the cops at some point during your stay, because the Garden did not have a house detective or any sort of security at all. Not even adequate locks on the doors. In one notorious incident, actress Miriam Hopkins was roused from her slumber when a naked man broke into her bedroom, chased her around the villa, peed in her bed, and then fell asleep in the puddle. Turns out he was a drunk rich kid in the wrong villa, and like most drunk rich kids, he got away with it scot-free. Poor Miriam didn't even get a clean set of sheets at the end of it all. The turn-down service just put the new sheets over the wet mattress without bothering to let it air out. Small robberies and petty fights were depressingly common. Of course, the lack of security also had some benefits. It meant it was relatively easy to stay anonymous and get away with virtually anything. A naked swim in the pool, drinking in public during Prohibition, harder drugs if you wanted them, even hookers. You could share a night of passion with a lover, even a same-sex one. You could live together without being married, in a time when that was still seriously frowned on. Of course, anonymity is not privacy. The walls at the Garden were famously thin. Playwright Mark Connolly once quipped that sometimes they kept you from going to sleep, and sometimes they compensated you for not sleeping. Phone calls and lovemaking sessions were rarely private, and if there was a raucous party out by the pool, you could forget about getting in your 40 winks. And there was always a party out by the pool. In what was undoubtedly the high point of the pool's existence, Johnny Weissmuller and Tallulah Bankhead dived into it after a night of drunken revelry. Of course, Tallulah couldn't swim and was wearing a heavy beaded dress and jewelry. In order to get back to the surface, she had to shed everything and came up stark naked. And completely unashamed, too, quipping, "Everyone's been dying to see my body. Now they can see it." While Johnny and her friends dredged the pool for her stuff, she amused herself by screwing with the hotel sign so that it said, "The Den of Allah." Even if Tallulah wasn't there that day, you were likely to have a better time partying out by the pool anyway. The Adamses hadn't exactly splurged on decent furniture, and the Garden's subsequent owners never bothered to upgrade it, or pay for any sort of maintenance for that matter. Over the years, the Garden of Allah became Hollywood's ultimate liminal space, teeming with guests whose lives were in transition. Wide-eyed ingenues on their way up, jaded character actors on their way back out, emigres and fugitives, people going through divorce, bankruptcy, and any sort of life change, major or minor, all supported by a group of hardcore regulars that can only be described as 24-hour party people, drawn by the Garden's anything-goes reputation. These were supported by the place's longtime employees and hangers-on, like the waitress who sold drugs she concealed in her updo. The most notorious was Ben the bellboy, a pudgy, middle-aged man who functioned as the hotel's concierge. He would run errands and make deliveries for guests, when he wasn't steaming open their mail, stealing their liquor, and rifling through their possessions while they were out. Or maybe the most notorious was the woman known only as Doc. She had no actual medical qualifications, but she did have a black leather bag with, an electric marital aid in it. She could be called over to your villa at any hour of the night to give you a, massage. Patrons of the never-ending party included John Barrymore, who rode his bicycle indoors and kept falling into the pool. Funny girl Fanny Bryce. Character actor Charles Butterworth, who used to get pushed around the pool in a wheelbarrow. John Carradine, who once hallucinated that he was Jesus and tried to walk across the pool. Virginia Sherrill, not yet married to Cary Grant. Dolores Del Rio. W.C. Fields, who shortened the distance from the villa to the bar by wading through the pool. Errol Flynn. Greta Garbo. Ed Gardner of Duffy's Tavern. Lillian Gish's younger sister Dorothy. D.W. Griffith, who liked the beds. Lillian Hellman. Charles Lawton and Elsa Lanchester. Ernst Lubitsch. Anita Louise, who used to swim fully made up and somehow never managed to disturb her makeup or hair. W. Somerset Maugham. David Niven. Original Ben-Hur and closeted gay man Ramon Navarro, Maureen O'Sullivan and her husband-to-be John Farrow, William Powell and Carol Lambert, who lived across the street and would sneak onto the property to use the pool, and Ginger Rogers. For a brief period, the hotel became a sort of an Algonquin Roundtable West, serving as a base of operations for East Coast writers and artists when they came to Hollywood to make a quick buck. Over the years, it played host to Robert Benchley, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Georges Kaufman, Charles MacArthur, Harpo Marx, Dorothy Parker, Harold Ross, Robert Sherwood, and Alexander Wolcott. They all went sort of nuts on the West Coast, spending their days drinking by the pool, gambling, and in general, acting like children. Robert Benchley was perhaps the Garden's longest-term resident, living there on and off for years while he pretended to work on his biography of Queen Anne. Really, though, he spent most of his time drinking and partying and tossing off timeless quips like, "I think I'll get out of these wet clothes and into a dry martini." He did most of his drinking at the Garden because he was so terrified of the traffic on Sunset Boulevard that he was afraid to cross the street. Harpo Marx stayed there for a time, but long days of filming tended to keep him away from the worst of the debauchery. One rare weekend off, he was looking forward to having a few hours to practice on his harp, only to be interrupted by a loud piano player in the villa next door who made it impossible to hear. He complained to management, who told him his new neighbor was Sergei Rachmaninoff, and no, they weren't going to ask him to quiet down. Harpo's revenge was simple. He opened his door and all his windows and played the first 4 bars of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor for 2 hours straight, until Rachmaninoff, who hated his most famous work, couldn't take it anymore and demanded to be moved. One person who wound up not staying at the Garden of Allah was author Robert Hitchens. In 1936, the Garden of Allah was being filmed for a third time, a Technicolor spectacular starring Marlene Dietrich and Charles Boyer, and the studio brought in Hitchens to work on the script. Hitchens' publicist decided his client absolutely had to stay in the hotel that bore his novel's name, and in their best villa, no less. The desk clerk on duty politely responded that all the villas were spoken for, but Hitchens could have a room in the main house if he wanted one. The publicist reminded the desk clerk that Mr. Hitchens had written The Garden of Allah, only to get the retort, "I don't care if he wrote the Bible. We don't have a villa." But you know who did come back? Alla Nazimova. The stock market crash of 1929 had wiped her out. By 1938, she could no longer afford to maintain her home in Rye. So she moved back to Hollywood and took up permanent residence on the second floor of Villa 24, overlooking the garden and pool and haunting the wild parties like a ghost. Even though Nazimova didn't interact much with the other guests, she was still very interested in them. She reportedly spent hours perched over the air vent, eavesdropping on the residents of the first floor, like Frank Sinatra and Orson Welles. She also put a sun deck and a small garden on the roof, which was also the perfect vantage point to creep on young starlets sunning themselves by the pool. Nazimova returned just in time for the Garden to go from shabby chic to shabby and dangerous. In 1941, the night clerk was hogtied by 2 armed men who emptied the cash register in the bar. And he was the lucky one, because the next year a different night clerk was shot dead during a robbery. Guests frequently returned to their rooms only to discover that they had been ransacked by parties unknown. In 1945, Red Skelton was robbed by a Marine while he was showing off his gun, and probably as a prelude to showing off his gun, if you catch my drift. How bad did it get? Well, when NAZIMOVA died of cancer in 1945, she was actively looking for a new place to live, even though the sentimental owners were giving her a huge discount on her rent. That's how bad. By the late 1940s, the garden was visibly in decline. It had passed through multiple owners, none of whom really gave a damn. Years of minimal maintenance and deferred upkeep were starting to pay dividends. The roof leaked. The interior walls hadn't been seriously cleaned or repainted in years. The carpets were stained and faded, and the furniture hadn't been replaced since 1927. Everything was infested with roaches, rats, and mice. The hotel still managed to attract a few high-profile names at strange times in their lives. Errol Flynn returned during his attempted comeback in 1957. Humphrey Bogart lived at the garden during his separation from Mayo Matho, as did Ronald Reagan during his divorce from Jane Wyman. Other guests of note included Perry Como, Ava Gardner, Jackie Gleason, Burl Ives, Fernando Lamas, Laurence Olivier, Phil Silvers, Frankie Lane back when he was plain old Francesco Lovecchio, and poor old Johnny Ray, who sounded sad upon the radio and moved a million hearts in mono. For the most part, though, residents of the garden were those who couldn't afford to stay somewhere better, and those who didn't know any better. More typical guests included Egyptian actress Patricia Medina, Turkish ballerina Necla Atez, child actress Patty McCormick, and the Today Show pet monkey, J. Fred Muggs. Then, a ray of hope. In 1955, the Garden of Allah was purchased by Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney and Dudley Murphy for $500,000. They had grandiose plans for the property, tearing down half of the house to build a larger bar, building a 1920s-themed bar in F. Scott Fitzgerald Old Villa, and then replacing all the other villas with Hawaiian-style lanai apartments. As time went by, they had to scale down those plans and really only managed to refurbish the bar and replace the furniture. Speaking of the furniture, actor Denver Pyle was driving by when he saw workers just dumping old beds, chairs, and tables into the parking lot. Pyle did a quick negotiation, bought everything for the bargain price of $300, and made a quick buck by reselling the items to curious passers-by. Probably helped that he claimed every bed had been the site of Errol Flynn's greatest sexual conquests. The new Garden of Allah didn't last long. The old clientele abandoned the hotel in droves during the long months of renovation and didn't return in force when it reopened in October. In 1956, Whitney and Murphy sold the property to Frank Gehry for a loss. Earhart tried to juice his profits by subdividing the existing bungalows to no avail. In 1957, he sold the property to Mo Markowitz for a mere $275,000. Markowitz managed to hold on to the hotel longer than his predecessors by instituting time-based pricing at the bar. At the 4 p.m., drinks cost 40 cents, and at midnight, they cost $1.20. The cheap drinks managed to pack the bar with penniless drunks, along with armies of hookers and pickpockets that preyed on them. But it was a short-term solution to what was proving to be a long-term problem. In 1959, Markowitz sold the property to Bart Lytton of Lytton Savings and Loan for $755,000. Lytton had no interest in running a hotel, but a plot of land at the end of the Sunset Strip was too valuable to pass up. He announced that he would raise the Garden of Allah and turn it into a strip mall, housing a branch of his savings and loan. The garden's last day of operation, on August 23, 1959, was capped off by a lavish farewell costume party. Guests dressed as film stars from the 1920s, but there was a singular lack of inspiration. Dozens of Charlie Chaplins and Clara Bows, and little else. Bart Lytton hosted the festivities, while dressed as the devil. The next day, the building was razed to the ground. And that was that. The Garden of Allah was no more. The wild hedonistic parties moved down the street to the Chateau Marmont, and the clandestine gay culture moved, well, everywhere else in West Hollywood, really. These days, the former hotel is just a nondescript strip mall, albeit one with a bank that is also an excellent example of mid-century Googie architecture. Though that situation will not last for long. Frank Gehry is looking to demolish the whole block and build a giant mixed-use glass and steel monstrosity. Construction is slated to start this year and be finished by 2023. I wish him the best of luck, and he'll need it. Time has not been kind to the previous owners of 8150 Sunset Boulevard and their plans, and I doubt it'll be kind to its new owners either. The most valuable source we consulted while writing this episode was Sheilah Graham's The Garden of Allah, though if you're interested in checking it out yourself, good luck. It's long out of print, and I was lucky that our local library hadn't purged their copy. You might have more luck finding a copy of Gavin Lambert's definitive biography of Allah NAZIMOVA, which is simply titled NAZIMOVA. Allah led a fascinating life that we only barely touched on here. And while you're at it, You should also totally check out her hauntingly beautiful adaptation of Salome, which is available for streaming on Netflix, though you'll have to search for Pioneer's First Women Filmmakers to find it. Also, many thanks to Number 7 for loaning me her copy of Harpo Speaks. It went AWOL for a few years, and I know she's loath to let it out of her sight. Another excellent source of information was the website of author Martin Turnbull. Martin wrote a series of novels set at the Garden of Allah during the golden age of Hollywood, and he's graciously shared his historical research online. Go check out his site and his books. They're fun reads. If you go to his website, martinturnbull.com, right now, you can grab free ebooks of the first 2 entries in the series. This is not an ad, by the way, just me being appreciative. Connections. In 1957, one of the guests of the Garden was Freeman Bernstein, who was running a scam where he sold fake jewelry to Hollywood wannabes. This is our third story where Bernstein makes an appearance. In the days before he was a straight-up con man, he had been a sleazy theatrical agent. In 1902, he briefly represented actress Laura Bigar, who had conspired to steal the entire estate of the late impresario Henry Martin Bennett. We covered the whole sordid tale in Series 4's Pleadings from Asbury Park. And in 1909, Bernstein actually managed to get fake spiritualist Anne Odelia Disdabar booked into Oscar Hammerstein's Victoria Ballroom, which was her last known public appearance. We went into excruciating detail about Disdabar's life in Series 3's Spirit Princess. Other guests of the Garden include Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester, who stayed there during the production of 1939's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In the opening scenes of that movie, Quasimodo defeats several competitors in an ugly man competition, including one played by acromegalic Rondo Hatton, the subject of Series 1's Monster Without a Mask. Another one-time resident of the Garden was W. Somerset Maugham, who stayed there while working on a screenplay. Maugham made a brief appearance earlier this season, writing a witty letter in support of Ulane's Dublin Municipal Gallery in the episode More Lovely and More Temperate. And that's all for now. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another cult episode called Suffer the Little Children. Until then, Quicquid minime sciunt, optime scire. This podcast was produced by David White for the Ancient and Esoteric Order of the Jackalope. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. All rights reserved, all wrongs reversed. The script of this episode with sources, links, and more can be found on our website at orderofthejackalope.com. That's orderofthejackalope.com with hyphens between the words. Keep up with our latest updates on social media at Order Jackalope on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Reddit. Or contact us via email at jackalope@orderofthejackalope.com. Want to join the fastest growing secret society in the nation? We'll show you our hidden secrets if you show us yours first. Visit our website and click Join Us for more information. You think the melon would take the edge off the pickle, but it really doesn't.